The developer for the project is CC 2.5 Associates with the principal Jim Hill. The property owners, there's actually 6 parcels involved in this PUD, and parcels A through C, which are sort of the western parcels, are owned by HCA and Health One, and 3 parcels D through F, which are sort of the western parcels, are owned by, and I hope I'm not butchering this, Arculius LLC. And the property addresses, I won't go through each one, but the address for the overall project is 506 East Hampden Avenue. As I mentioned before, the applicant has submitted an application to rezone the parcels described above from M2 mixed-use medical office, high-density residential, and limited retail zone district to the Synergy Medical Planned Unit Development. The proposed PUD includes approximately 92,000 square feet of medical office space on top of 14,000 square feet of first-floor retail restaurant space. The project also has a self-contained structured parking. In terms of a recommendation, the Community Development Department recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission review the Synergy PUD request and forward a favorable recommendation for approval to City Council. The project, we have proof of posting that the project was posted from May 24th, 2018 to June 5th, 2018. We also have proof of publication that it was published in the Inglewood Herald on May 24th and also published on the city's website from May 24th to June 5th. So, in terms of the project location, the subject property involved with the PUD is very close to our Swedish hospital. In fact, you can see here on the map, which is also included in your packet, this east-west street is East Hampden Avenue. To the north of East Hampden Avenue is the Swedish Medical Center. And then the project area is bounded on the west by Pennsylvania and on the east by South Pearl Street. The project goes southward from Hampden about 225 feet on the west side of the alley and about 200 feet on the east side of the alley. North of Hampden, where Swedish Medical Hospital is actually zoned M1, which is almost identical to the M2 zone district, which the subject property is in, except for the M1 district does not allow that retail component. This site is about 1.29 acres, or about 56,125 square feet. If you include the alley that is between the two portions of the site. The plans are to vacate this alley and take the existing north-south alley and turn it to the west, not only to accommodate the flow of vehicles, but also to place the utilities in that new transportation and utility easement. That will have to go to City Council, as will the PUD, but that alley vacation and subsequent dedication of the transportation and utility easement will go to City Council. Surrounding the PUD site, we've got a thrift store, parking lots, residence, a hair salon, apartments, and a parking structure. So we've got quite a number of different land uses surrounding the site. As far as procedurally on this PUD, I'll just kind of go over it real quickly. Before tonight, the applicant actually conducted 2 neighborhood meetings. They are required to have 1 neighborhood meeting. They had 2, and I'll explain that in a moment. But they do a mailing within 1,000 square foot radius of the site. And the first neighborhood meeting was on August 24th, 2017. Meeting notes are included in your packet from that meeting. It was not that well attended, but it was back in August. And there is a provision in the UDC that you can't have more than 180 days pass between the time of your neighborhood meeting and the time of your public hearing in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So they were still tweaking the project a little bit. So another neighborhood meeting was conducted on February 8th of 2018. We had more attendance at that meeting, and there's also notes from that meeting in your packet. So in terms of overall procedure, they're required to have a neighborhood meeting, and then they submit a formal application for a PUD to the city. That PUD application is reviewed by the development review team. It was reviewed, and it pretty much keeps getting reviewed until, from a technical standpoint, all the kinks are worked out. At that point, we're able to schedule a public hearing with the Planning and Zoning Commission. That's why we're here tonight. Following tonight, depending on your recommendation, it will go to a public hearing in front of City Council, where they will take additional public testimony, and then a first reading of an ordinance will be scheduled, followed up by a second reading of the ordinance. And if all that passes, there's a 30-day referendum period that follows that. So that's kind of an outline of the process. So a little bit of background. As I mentioned, the developer is proposing primarily two uses for this location in the medical district. The first use being retail and restaurants on the first floor, and then a state-of-the-art medical office space on 4 levels above that. There'll be, in terms of the parking garage, there's 1 level below grade, 1 level at grade, and 1 level above grade, and it will accommodate about 293 spaces. I mentioned that the development review team, this went to the DRT group 3 times, and as of now, all those any technical issues have been worked out. So now I just kind of want to give a quick overview from a zoning perspective of the PUD. The PUD really has 2 parts to it. There's the district plan, which is really more of the written material on the first and second page of the PUD that's in your packet. And the district plan acts kind of like the zoning code for the PUD. So it's written standards, it's setbacks, it's height, and that's what you fall back on. If something is not addressed in the district plan, it falls back to the original zone district. Then the second part of the PUD is the PUD site plan, which is sort of the rest of the plans and drawings that go along with it. It's not just one plan. You'll see in your packet there's a utility plan. There's different plans associated with it, but that's the more site specific as to what's going to go there. There is some level of flexibility incorporated into that site plan, and some of that's addressed on the district plan, but by and large, you're going to get something very close to what you see. So I'll just start out with some of the district plan areas that are addressed in your site plan and try and touch on them fairly quickly here. In terms of architectural character, there's some requirements for a mix of material patterns and color changes, higher ceiling heights on the first floor, and I'm sure Gary, the architect, will talk a little bit more about the architecture on the building. There's requirements for building entries to be defined by architectural elements. The first floor generally contains glass and masonry, with the floors above it having other materials like panelized stucco, more glass, and other accent materials. Permitted uses. A PUD allows you to add or take away uses from what is in the previous zone district, in this case which was the M2 zone district. And this PUD doesn't propose a lot of changes to that. In fact, everything that is proposed in this PUD is allowed currently in that zone district. But primarily it's In the document, it lists commercial uses, generally including food and beverage services, medical services, medical offices, retail, associated parking facilities. The PUD does not list residential or public/institutional uses. So I don't think the city will be moving into that building. So that's the permitted uses. I should highlight one thing. The M2 zone district, the limited retail component that exists today, does limit the amount of retail to 10,000 square feet. This PUD is proposing 14,000 square feet, although that will likely not just be one tenant. It'll be multiple tenants. Moving on, the PUD proposes dimensional standards, and this is a chart that is in your packet. And there's only a couple of places where the PUD varies from the dimensional requirements of the existing M2 district. One is, the first one being that the maximum height in this area of the M2 zone district can be 145 feet. The PUD limits the maximum height to 100 feet. And mechanical equipment can go on top of that up to 30% of that height. Not that it would, but so the height proposed in the PUD is actually lower than what's allowed in the M2 district. The next category, maximum retail gross floor area, I already touched on, and that is the M2 zone district allows a maximum of 10,000 square feet, whereas the Synergy Medical PUD proposes 14,000 max retail. And then under minimum setbacks, the front setback is the same as the M2 district. It's actually a build-to line that the front of the building has to be 0 to 10 feet from the front property line. And then the PUD, there's another provision in the M2 zone district that there be a front upper story setback above 60 feet of 20 feet, meaning in the base district zoning for the M2 district, you can build your building 60 feet straight up from the street, but then once you hit 60 feet, you have to move it back 20 feet. The PUD proposes to not have that requirement, such that they could build the front of the building all the way up to their maximum height. That upper story setback, and I'll just touch on that for a moment, one of the purposes for it is to kind of control the mass of the building, also potential shadowing of the building. But the fact that they're proposing a maximum height of 100 feet instead of 145 feet sort of more than negates that. So I don't think that there's any impacts by not having that front story setback. The next setback is the side setbacks. That in this case would be along Pearl in Pennsylvania. And again, those are 0 and no more than 10 feet, just like the M2 district that exists today. And then one other change that the PUD proposes is on the rear setback. On the east side of the alley, a 5-foot rear setback is required. The PUD proposes a 0-foot setback. Parking. The parking proposed by the PUD is actually very close to what's in the Unified Development Code. The one change that is proposed in the PUD is that the parking ratio for restaurants in the Unified Development Code is 1 space per 100 square feet, whereas in the PUD it's 1 space per 600 square feet of restaurant. Now, that came out of a parking study that was done by Walker Parking Consultants. And they looked at the entire parking situation for the whole development. And what they cited in the parking study was that in this particular area, they have sort of a captive population of 4,200 people that are frequenting Craig as well as Swedish hospitals. And a good amount of the customer base for those restaurants has already parked there. So it's not an additional trip. They're sort of already accounted for in their trips to the hospitals, to the medical office building itself, or as employees. Some of the other things it cited was the managed valet parking that I'm sure the architect will talk a little bit about, and then the proximity to public transportation with RTD routes 12, 35, as well as the former ART shuttle, which is now called the Inglewood Trolley. All in all, in summary, based on those ratios, the required parking is 281 spaces. The plan provides for 293 spaces. There are also more bicycle parking spaces than are required. There's 30 bicycle spaces required, and 56 are provided.
Brooke, could I just get a clarification?
Sure.
When you say 281, it says, based on the plan above. Is that what it would be if it was M2?
No, that's based on the ratios that were developed out of the Walker parking study. That study would say that you need 281 and 293 are provided. That is not what it would be if you use the one space per 100 square feet of the underlying M2 zone district.
Do you know what the requirement would be if it was M2? I
don't, but maybe I'll do a calculation while the applicant's giving their presentation and come back with that.
Thank you.
And the applicant may know that. And it may be in the PUD. I just have to spend a little time looking. So that is the parking. In terms of traffic, a traffic impact study was done by Kimley Horn and Associates for the PUD, and that study encompassed the area between Logan Street on the west, Clarkson on the east, Hamden Avenue on the north, and 285 on the south. What that study found, I'm not a traffic engineer, but they look at different levels of service, LOS, for intersections. And what it showed is that post-construction, the intersections within the study area would range from an A to a C level of service. Now, the level of service ranges from A to F, with A having very little delay to F having long delays and congestions. And so, as a standard traffic engineering practice, there's a recommendation that that intersections should have a LOS, or level of service, no lower than a D for acceptable operations at signalized intersections, and a level of service of E for movements of unsignalized intersections. So all the intersections within the study area are above those two thresholds. The traffic study was reviewed by the Public Works Traffic Division, specifically the city's traffic engineer, and they concurred with its findings. In terms of signage, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that. That's pretty detailed, but it varies. The signage is very close to what would be found in the M2 zone district. You'll see in your drawing packets there's a couple of signs that are higher up on the building, not unlike what you see at Swedish now. And the current UDC for the medical district only allows one sign per building face. The PUD proposes 2 signs per building face. However, the way that calculation is done, in the PUD, the signs would be about half the size of what would be allowed in the M2 zone district or Unified Development Code. So although you might have 2 signs, they're each about half the size of what they could be of the one that would be allowed by the UDC. The other part of the PUD changes to the sign code is that there's a provision for private parking and traffic directional signage that limits those signs to 6 square feet. And I think it contemplates more of a McDonald's or a smaller business with parking directional signage. PUD proposes a maximum size of 25 square feet. I think given the sort of the scale of the project, the parking garage, the mass of the building, that is not, at least from staff's perspective, unacceptable. I think it's in keeping with the scale of it. Plus, that's an area where wayfinding is really important for people going to those kinds of uses, obviously. Moving on to landscaping. The UDC for the medical district requires that 10% of the entire property be landscaped, which would equate to approximately 5,600 square feet of landscaping and translate to 18 trees and 113 shrubs. The PUD proposes to figure it a different way. They propose to figure that 10% figure on the area between the principal structure and the curb, which would require only about 650-something square feet of landscape area. The PUD proposes 750 square feet of landscape area, but also includes 14 trees and 38 shrubs. That's a significant decrease, but I would add that when you have these front and side setbacks that are 0 to 10 feet maximum setbacks, the only way you can't get a whole lot of landscaping on the fronts and sides. You can only pick it up in the rear of the building, which isn't really as valuable from a landscape perspective. I think the thing that's important about this project is it's in a highly urban area, and its context is really to be pedestrian friendly. And this project, not only are they putting in most of the trees that would be otherwise required, and a good number of shrubs, but they're doing a lot of street furniture, shrub beds, raised planters, granite pavers, high quality materials, some seat walls, and pedestrian lights. So from a landscape perspective, that's very important for this kind of an urban site, more so than sheer quantity of, say, grass. And then lastly, drainage and utilities. I mentioned the technical review by the development review team. There's a grading plan and preliminary drainage report that go along with the PUD, as well as a utility plan that's in the PUD. Those were both reviewed and approved by the Public Works Department as well as the Utilities Department. There will be, obviously, further development of those at the construction drawing phase, but they're pretty well developed at this point for the PUD. So lastly, just to summarize, the Synergy Medical PUD has been reviewed by the city's development review team and sort of gotten by any potential technical issues. The content of the PUD documents themselves matches what the UDC calls for in terms of information. And then the staff report gets very detailed, and I don't want to necessarily do that in my presentation, but the staff report goes through the Inglewood Municipal Code approval criteria for PUDs, as well as the criteria for Planning Commission review and recommendation. And it goes through each one of those items that's also in your sort of PUD decision guideline. And so there are staff sort of recommendations and points within there. I don't want to go through each one of them. I think the commission can take those for however you want them and come to your own conclusions. So lastly, Community Development Department would recommend that Planning and Zoning Commission forward a favorable recommendation for approval to City Council. And with that, I'd open it up for any questions.
Yeah, I have a question. A PUD is based on the need for a property that has a certain characteristic that makes it difficult to develop under any existing zones. And I'm struggling a bit with that requirement for a PUD, and that what is the unique characteristic of the property that would make this PUD required as opposed to simply going through the regular zoning and variance process.
Okay. So I think you may be touching on some of the approval criteria that I was just referring to. And so let me talk about that approval criteria a little bit, and I'll start out with that. On page 6 of your, it may not be page 6 at the bottom of your packet, but page 6 of the staff report at the top right of the staff report. It says Inglewood Municipal Code 16-2-8F approval criteria. And then under number 1, there's a threshold that you have to meet at least one of the following criteria. And so first it goes into 1A. It talks about proposed development will exceed development quality standards, level of public amenities, or levels of design innovation otherwise applicable under this title. And the staff report goes into 3 points associated with that particular criteria. And then it says, and the proposed development would not be allowed or practicable under a standard zone district with conditional uses or a reasonable number of zoning variances or administrative adjustments. And I think that's what you're talking about. And so in the staff report, what it goes on to list is what would be needed to develop this project as proposed would be 6 variances. So 6 variances would be required, and those are listed under that criteria in the staff report, which variances. They include the gross retail floor area. It includes the 20-story or the 20-foot upper story setback, the 5-foot rear setback, a variance or some other kind of alternative parking plan to reduce the restaurant parking ratio from 1 space per 100 square feet to 1 space per 600 square feet, a variance for the signage items I talked about with the multi-story building wall signs, and then also a variance for the landscaping. I never, since I've been with the city, I've never taken a package of 6 variances on one property in front of the Board of Adjustment and Appeals. So for that reason, we opted to do the PUD. I think the applicant might also be able to elaborate a little bit. Quite frankly, I think they wanted to come in front of the city and show what their project is.
So what I would challenge you on that and say that these are simply exceptions that the applicant wants. What is the unique characteristic of this property that makes it difficult to develop? If all of these variances weren't asked for, wouldn't it be possible to develop a very similar project within the M2
you
zone?
Could, but in the criteria, so in number 1, in this criteria, there's 1, and it says, and it's got a 1A component, and it's got a, and the 1A component has 2 parts to it.
Yep.
The higher design qualities, and that you would need variances to do it. And then it says, or 1B, the property cannot be developed or no reasonable economic use of the property can be achieved under the existing zoning, even through the use of conditional uses or a reasonable number of zoning variances or administrative adjustments.
Right, and I get that. I just think this property is eminently developable under the M2.
Correct.
So I'm kind of challenging you, saying Why is this even a PUD process?
So they do not have to meet both of those criteria.
Right. But it doesn't meet either one.
The staff reports outlines how it meets 1A and the second part of that regarding the variances. With respect to the no reasonable economic use, there's a response to that particular criteria as well. That there's really no comment on.
Yes, we agree to disagree.
Okay, sorry. Other questions?
I had a question on the, this is two technical questions. The applicant is listed as the Mulhern Group, which is the architect.
Correct.
And the applicant needs to be either the record owner of the property, purchaser under a sale authorized in writing to do so, or an agent of the record owner.
Yes.
My gut was that Mulhern Group was probably an agent of the developer and not the record owner.
There's a chain. There's a chain there. The developer is authorized by the property owners, and then the applicant is authorized by the developer.
So then shouldn't the applicant be the CC 2.5? Because they're being authorized.
They could be. They certainly could be.
Okay. I just didn't want to create a technical problem by not, if there was an approval, that it would be the purchaser under sale rather than.
I understand, yeah. We've got a chain of those documents.
Okay. All right, so then that's all fine.
Okay.
In the staff report, what you said, the change on retail, the variance, it looks like what you said was that it was going from 10,000 to 14,000, but what was stated in the report that it was going from 10,000 to unlimited on retail?
To none.
So why not have a cap at 15,000 instead of unlimited?
We could absolutely do that. In retrospect, looking at the staff report, in that particular slot in that chart, if I go back, this item right here is what you're referring to. I changed that. The applicant didn't in my staff report, and that could very easily be 15,000. And the Planning Commission could put that in as a condition of approval if you'd like to do that.
I just was wondering if there was a long-term development plan for the property where it would need to be higher than 14.
I should really answer it by saying those are my words, not theirs, the none.
Okay. Then on the vacation of the alley, would that be something that would happen if we were to recommend favorably? Would that all happen simultaneously through City Council?
What would happen with City Council is following the public hearing, there's going to be a first and second reading of ordinances for the PUD. Concurrently, at those same meetings, we could take an ordinance to vacate the alley and dedicate the transportation and utility easement to a first and second reading. So it would happen concurrently with approval of the PUD.
Okay. So then if we were to recommend favorably, then one thing we'd want to talk about is whether to make approval conditional on vacation of the alley.
I don't know if the commission needs to actually address the alley. That will be, obviously we wanted to make you aware of it. It is part of the PUD. My sense is that if you recommend approval of the PUD, by de facto you're recommending approval of vacation of the alley. It all still has to go to council, obviously.
I don't know if this is better to ask you, but it was hard in the plans for me to tell whether there's a sewer line that currently goes through the alley. It looks like it's being totally rerouted under the plans so that there wouldn't be a sewer line underneath the building.
Correct. Yeah, there won't be any utilities under the building, hence the alley vacation.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. And what about if the alley is vacated? How would that? Did the traffic study address how that would impact traffic flow for the properties to the south?
Yes, it did. And maybe the applicant can address that a little bit.
I had a quick question for you, Brooke. Under the landscape, it's stated that it's considered an urban site. Is there something in the code that requires less landscaping because it's an urban site?
No. There are some provisions for mixed use versus single use, but there's nothing in the code. But I think it's implicit in you're trying to develop a landscape code to fit most properties in a broader area, and the M1 and M2 zone districts are a pretty broad area. This particular location on Hamden, right across the street from the Swedish hospital entrance, is kind of as urban as that corridor can get. I will say that the setbacks on streets fronting or properties fronting Hamden are more. There's more of a build-to line than some other properties in the M2 zone district. So that sort of implies that you're going to push the building to the street. But to answer your question directly, no, there's not a specific provision for urban versus something less urban.
Okay.
Yeah, none of these variances seem unreasonable, really. I'm kind of with Mr. Fish here. Is this before us because this is the more expedient path?
Certainly not. A variance is a much quicker path.
Why didn't this project go through the variance process and just?
Because at a certain point, when you take a project, as I mentioned, I've never taken a project with 6 variances on one project. At a certain point, you've got a Board of Adjustment and Appeals making a decision on a much sort of broader, bigger project that is sometimes reserved for the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. So we tend to not say, hey, if you have, at what point do you put a limit on it? 10 variances, 12 variances. There certainly are some projects that would need that. They're also not allowed to hear use variances, but it's really a decision to not sort of try and hide this under the cloak of a number of variances. It's a good project, and the applicant was certainly willing to do that. The other part of it is you're going to have to vacate an alley, which is going to go to council anyways. Granted, it's not as long a process as a PUD, but I think the applicant wants public input, wants a good project. They were perfectly willing to do a second neighborhood meeting, and so I look at it more as they're willing to do it. We felt it was the right thing to do rather than take 6 variances and brought it before the commission and hopefully council.
Okay, well, look forward to the presentation.
I have a couple questions, Brooke. For M2 based zoning, if you have the maximum retail at 10,000 square feet, is that dependent upon the overall size of the building, or could a building with a 10,000 square foot footprint only have 10,000 square foot of retail, as well as a building with a 100,000 square foot footprint only have 10,000 square foot of retail?
It's more to do with the gross retail square footage than the size of the footprint.
But however big the building is, it's only 10,000 square feet.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. They could have, for instance, that 4,000 square foot differential maybe put some additional medical office on the first floor to get down to the 10. But given the location, the fact that they want to put retail in, we see that as a big plus. And the other thing is that it's not going to be a single tenant, 14,000 square feet. So,
And for M2 zoning, are you required to do changes in texture, materials, or colors, or things like that?
You're not. There is a transparency requirement, and I don't know it off the top of my head. It's a certain percentage of the building face. I think it's like 60 or 75%, and there's a transparency requirement that goes from something like 3 feet to 8 feet. So obviously, as you see the building, it's very transparent. There's a lot of glazing, so there's not really they're not proposing to go away from that.
And then in terms of the 0-foot setback, there's a portion of it along the alley and then a portion of it that abuts another property. And
0 foot is along the other property.
along the other property.
Correct, which is an apartment complex. But they happen to, on that side of their property, they have a drive.
Okay.
It's a driveway.
Okay. Right, that's all I have.
Back to the alley for just a moment. I understand that the council will take this up. My experience has been when you cut into something very, very old, bad things happen with what you hope to remain. Is there a commitment on the part of the developer to make whole as far south as what they have to go in order to make our utilities whole?
That particular document for the alley vacation and has not been drawn up yet for the alley vacation and dedication of the transportation and utility easement, but I think that's a good point, and that kind of language can be added into that.
Just a point there. And then parcel E is on the south end of the property, just to the north of the salon. So when the alley is vacated, presumably, and it would be right to the south of parcel E and to the north of the salon, where I'm assuming that the utilities will now run and that land will be dedicated, the requisite quantity of land will be dedicated to the city?
It's actually going to be a transportation and utility easement dedicated to the city, as opposed to a fee simple right-of-way dedication to the city. And the reason is they need to do, and the applicant can talk about that a little bit better than I can. There's some improvements in a portion of that easement that normally wouldn't be able to go into a fee simple public right-of-way dedication. So instead, it's a transportation and utility easement where the city will retain rights for access to the utilities and access for transportation, but it's not a true dedicated public right-of-way alley per se.
And so along those lines, there was a notion there was going to be a zero setback to that. Would that give the city in the future the opportunity, actually enough room to work on those utilities?
Yes. To answer your question, yes. There was a lot of discussion about that in DRT as to just how wide a normal alley, I think this one, normal alley is 16 feet. I think this one, north-south, is 15. The overall width in here, I believe, is 25 feet. And a portion of that is for some of the other items. And then a portion of it is, it incorporates a turning radius for, I know they did turning templates on trash trucks turning to the left and that sort of thing.
So I'm going to ask for a little bit of conjecture on your part. Okay? So given your experience and never having taken 6 requests for a variance on the same brand new development, from a technical standpoint, if they were to go with the existing zoning and then go for variances on these 6 different items, would each one of those variances would it need to be taken in a separate application to the Board of Adjustment?
No, we would lump them all into one. They would hear motions on each of those 6 variances.
Okay.
So some might get approved, some might not. But we would take it presumably to one meeting, albeit it would be a long meeting, but we would package them.
So the Board of Adjustment would then have the purview to and discretion to say we'll approve 3 and not the other 3.
Correct.
Or 2 and 4, or whatever that mix is, or all 6, or deny all 6.
Correct.
So a little bit of conjecture on your part. What's the risk of doing it that way versus doing it in a planned unit development as what's been proposed here this evening?
There's a little bit of a
opinion.
Yeah.
Conjecture.
This is highly speculative, but well, even though the variance process is much quicker than a PUD process, taking that roughly 2-month variance process could take that longer if certain things didn't pass, could take that, it might delay the starting of the PUD process longer. The other thing is, and this is pure conjecture, is when you start, I don't want to say pitting boards or commissions against each other, but trying to go to each one to see if you get a different answer, I don't know that that's the best approach. So that's what I would say. And I would also say I've actually never taken a project of this magnitude to the board. They're usually not dealing with 6 variances on a big project like this that I think a lot of citizens are interested in.
Okay, I appreciate that. Last question, and maybe we'll have to go to our attorney for this, but curious, this is going to be not a hospital 501c3 building. This is going to be an office building where physicians and such are in there. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. I'd love, if you want to ask that same question to the applicant. That was
Is it a taxable event?
in terms of.
Can we levy property taxes?
It's my understanding, yes.
All right, thank you.
I didn't have any questions for you.
I just have a quick one. Does the traffic study include the effects of deliveries to all the retail stuff like the restaurants and whatever else might go there? I couldn't clearly make out where deliveries would be made to those, since that appears the main delivery is off the alley in the back. Am I correct? And then all of the retail is at the front? I didn't know if that was
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd rather have the applicant ask that. They've got a lot more knowledge of that patterns. There's some areas that are designated for that, but in terms of retail versus the rest of the building, I don't have that off the top of my head.
And I had one more about future development, and it may be for them. So does this PUD allow them, if they wanted to put 10 parking levels on the back, and that change up to the 100 feet?
There is a provision in the PUD, and the applicant can elaborate on it, but for the possible addition of 1 level of parking.
Okay, and then that would be the limit for the
Correct.
PUD? Okay.
If you don't mind if I add on to that, and applicant could speak to this too, but one of the items you mentioned in the staff report was that by stepping down the parking garage in the back, it helps, match more of the character of the surrounding community.
Correct.
Within that same provision, there's the possibility of lowering one of the floors on the office side and raising one of the floors on the parking side, or maybe making it, from my understanding, that it could be all one height. And that, is that something then, if it was all one height, that could change, not match the character as much?
Well, certainly, they could build to less than the height on the office side of it, if they wanted to remove a floor from the office side of things. But on the parking side of things, it's my understanding that it could only go up one level higher than it currently shows, and there's a dashed line on the PUD that shows that.
Okay. Thank you. Daryl?
Oh, I had one more.
I'm sorry, Judy.
I did have one more question about the apartment building, and behind that apartment building, they have parking. So they have parking up to their lot, and then a driveway between the building and where they park. So my question is, the people that are using the alley behind this new development, is there going to be something that blocks them off from going straight through and now creating a full alley across from east to west? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Anybody?
And I can ask them.
Okay, I think in their presentation they're going to actually have more plans, more actual plans than I have showing what's proposed. So if you don't mind, I'll let them answer that question. It's my understanding that, but this will be fully functional to come up the alley and across to the west here. If somebody from this apartment building wants to come in, park, they can still access this same alley.
No, yeah, I'm more concerned about the people coming in from Pennsylvania Street and turning their parking lot into an alley.
I got you.
Going from west to east.
Understand.
I just wanted to clarify, not to beat this point into the ground, but if I understand correctly, you're saying that bringing this to the PUD process rather than the variance process, you felt, it's a good project and it's more transparent process and more effective to do it this way?
I won't disagree with that.
Okay.
I don't think we would have had to, but yes, that's a side benefit is it is more transparent. And again, to take a project with 6 variances to the board and then show up at council and say, hey, we want you to vacate this alley with no involvement otherwise from council. Also, those variances wouldn't be very beneficial until, unless somebody knows they can vacate the alley.
Right. And then I guess, my understanding of the PUD process, we could approve it. Still, we could say, 5 of these 6 variances seem reasonable, but we could approve amended with.
Well, in terms of the planning commission?
Yeah,
could we? The planning commission can put any condition on this that they would like.
That's what I thought. So we can. It's not an all or nothing.
Correct.
Okay.
You can approve or approve with conditions or deny.
Okay, thank you.
I think we should move on.
I have one other real quick question. So the building itself will cut across 4 lots. Could that have been constructed without a variance? An additional, could you construct a building across 4 lots without a whole other series of variances?
You can combine the properties. You are correct in that it would complicate things if you've got variances that cross multiple properties. One could combine the properties first, but then you've got property owners sort of combining property under one ownership when they don't have any entitlements that they might be looking for. So it'd be a little bit backwards. But you're correct. There's actually 6 parcels, 2 owners and 6 parcels. And getting variances would be a little more complicated as to, do you do a variance for each of those 6 parcels or 6 for 6 parcels? It could be problematic.
So we'll move on and hear from the applicant.
I have one more question for staff. I'm just, I was trying to remember, I was on the Board of Adjustments and Appeal. Who has the authority to vacate initially? I mean, to recommend to vacate? I know council decides, but but is it, I thought it was the Board of Adjustment, or is it us that we do vacations of alleyways?
It can go straight to council. The zoning code is silent on it.
Oh. I remember we vacated the property near Craig, and I think we did that.
And that was a little bit of a different process. I wasn't involved in that, but there was I don't remember the exact process. I know council ultimately was involved in that.
Right, they make the
But
decision.
there was a public hearing or some type of public involvement with the Planning and Zoning Commission. I do remember that. I wasn't involved, but I remember it. The Acoma Lofts project that was recently completed, they did a very similar alley vacation to this. In fact, they did the exact same thing. They took it a north-south alley and they turned it west out to Acoma, and that just went to City Council.
I think the Chick-fil-A down at Dartmouth did the same thing, really. So, and I don't remember seeing that either, so I think it normally goes to council.
Correct.
Thank you, Brooke.
You're welcome.
Pop the applicant up.
I do. My name is Gary Ellermann with the Mulhern Group, 1400 Glenarm Place, Suite 300, Denver, Colorado 80202. Well, good evening. Again, I'm Gary Ellermann. I represent the Mulhern Group, who is the applicant on the project. We are not the owner. We are authorized by the owner to speak on their behalf this evening. We are presenting Synergy Medical, and based upon the questions and the discussion that has happened so far, I'm actually going to go through a presentation that will answer, I think, a lot of these questions, and then we'll summarize this in a video to give you a very clear picture of why we brought this thing through the PUD process. Before I do that, I would like to say that it has been a long time getting to this point, to this evening. And I want to thank the owner, the whole companies, Calcon, the contractor we've been working with, certainly all of our staff, all of our consultant team, and Brooke and the entire city staff. We have met on many occasions and had some of these same debates, so we're pleased to be here this evening to present this project. It's not often that you get a call from a developer and they say, hey, I want you to go look at the site, and you get the opportunity to look at a prime site. This is across the street from two hospitals, Swedish with a great national reputation, and Craig, in fact, with a great international reputation for rehabilitation. So when we saw this site and we saw the potential that could be there, we got pretty excited about it. It's not often that you get a site like this that has the ability to impact in a very positive way a community and improve an entire district. And that's how we looked at this particular site. As Brooke mentioned, there are 4,200 people that work in the Swedish and Craig hospital districts. We believe that that is a great resource for this project. So we did our research. We first came and sat down with staff, said, what do you think? How is this happening? We looked at what the corridor plans were, what the district plans were for East Hampton Avenue. We understood that. We met with HCA, who is one of the owners of the properties. We did some informal interviews with staff, and we asked what is needed here to sort of make these two hospital campuses a preeminent place to be. And we got some of the answers, and those answers were, we really need to expand our medical facilities. We need some new state-of-the-art facilities for medical office. That's needed so that the healthcare community can not only retain, but expand their network of doctors by having new space that they can use to bring in new practices and expand the healthcare that is provided. The other thing we heard was that there's a real need for us to have a getaway, an oasis off-site. When you are in the healthcare industry and you care for others, the people you're caring for are often, they're there because they need help. And it can often be a very stressful environment. So when we talked to some of the folks in the area, we said, and the staff, they said, it would be really great to have some place to go outside of our cafeteria where we can actually rub shoulders with the community, sort of de-stress a little bit. And so we said, there's an opportunity here for us to create an oasis that will actually help and come alongside what the healthcare industry is doing at Swedish and Craig. So those are the two primary things that we were looking for at this project, is to provide additional state-of-the-art office space, medical office space, and then create an area where we can have restaurants. And that wasn't just a one-sided viewpoint. We also looked at all the residential apartments that are in the area. And virtually in this area, as we looked at this as sort of ground zero, there are very few places where they can go have a drink in the evening, have a breakfast in the morning, gather for a dinner, other than walking east or west up the corridor. So we felt that there was a real nice energy here. That's one of the reasons why we called this synergy. We wanted to make that energy be a symbolic thing between the healthcare of Swedish and Craig and what we were providing. So we do see this as a transformational project, and we thought that, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we could create a lantern for the street? Now, when I go through the slides, you'll see that there's some missing tooth in the urban fabric here, and this particular project, I think, is going to fill that in very nicely. You can see the site here is identified by this blue rectangle, and this site east of the alley is the HCA parking lot, surface parking lot. This is an older aerial, but that's the old Copper Pot restaurant. Now that restaurant is no longer there. It's been removed. It went out of business, so that both sides of the alley are now clean sites. We realized that there was a public alley there, and if we wanted to look, and we did look at several schemes. I think what we're presenting here this evening is Scheme 10. We looked at how do we develop this with individual sites, and we did studies, and what we've consistently found was that we needed to have a project that was very self-sustaining. By that, what we mean is that it had the uses that it wanted to provide, it parked itself in an appropriate manner, it had good access, and it didn't burden anything else in the district. Now, historically, you may know that there have been some parking and some traffic challenges. That has been largely relieved over this past year. If I recall, I've heard that there are 1,100 additional parking spaces that are coming on board by the two parking structures provided by Swedish and Craig. But irrespective of that, we wanted to come in with a project that we felt was totally self-contained and would not add any problems to the district, but create some new things that would help solve issues that are there now. Now, one of the things that we try to do is put ourselves in the position of the user, and what is it going to be like for the user of this property. And we looked at that from several different perspectives. We looked at it first from the point of view of those coming to the building. Now, those people who are coming to a medical office building are often affirmed. They are handicapped sometimes. And so we have to be very cautious and very careful and conscientious about how we get them in and out of the building. Second, we want to make sure it's pedestrian friendly, that it's very accessible, not only to those people across the street, but also those in the neighborhood. And then third, we want to make sure that we had good access vehicularly throughout the project. So when I go to the next slide, you'll see that we've got three sort of districts in the project. This is what you see in the orange is the retail component. We specifically placed that along the street for several reasons. We wanted there to be a continuity of the streetscape. We wanted it to be visible from when you came into Swedish Hospital here or came out of it, and as you went up and down the corridor where the public transportation is. So we put that all the way over from block to block, from Pearl Street all the way over to Pennsylvania Street. You'll see right below that in blue an internal circulation area. Now, we needed this building to stand on its own, so we put its own entry in on the west side on Pennsylvania Street. You'll see that right here. That's the primary entrance. And the reason we did that is that we wanted to have access here to our parking structure and the front door be on Pennsylvania Street away from what is the front door access to Swedish. We felt by dispersing that traffic, it would help calm some of the issues that were in the area. You'll also see, though, that we did put an entry here on the east side on South Pearl Street. The reason for that is that when you look across the street, this is the primary entrance for Swedish here, but they have Swedish MOB 1, MOB 2, MOB 3, then Craig to the north, and this is MOB 4. And there was a large pedestrian crossing at that location. Now, this is the principal parking structure for the Swedish campus. At the northwest location of that, there is a crosswalk that exists today, and there is a signalized pedestrian caution sign where you hit the button, the light goes on, and because we want all that traffic to stop, and so the city put that in sometime in the past. And so we wanted to have a safe crossing from the north side of Hampton at their location. So we put in an entry point right here. And we then interconnected those internally. You'll see south of that is our primary parking structure. Coming in off of this entry, there is a flat plate portion to the parking structure. That is our front door. When patients come to the facility, they come in here off of Pennsylvania Street, and they see that front door right here where the elevator core is internally. This is a porte-cochere area that allows for circulation within, and it allows patients to be dropped off at the front door. They can come in under cover, so when it's snowing or raining, it's a protected area, and they can go directly into the building primary lobby, right up the elevator core into the building. There's also an access over here. And the reason we did that is that we wanted to have more than one access point. We didn't want there to be any choke up of circulation internal to the parking structure. And so we have a circulation through here. Now, you do have to turn inside the parking structure, but that also aligns with the access that goes into the parking structure for the doctors here at the Swedish parking. In terms of site geography, the site slopes down from a high point here, going to the west about 6 feet to mid-block. Currently, today, there is a sidewalk. You can't really see it right here, but there's a sidewalk that comes here on the north side, right into the middle of the block. We did not like that connection. We felt it was inappropriate to have a mid-block crossing. And so we have mentioned that to Swedish. Certainly we can't make any improvements on their property, but what we did is make sure that we didn't have anything across this area, but instead encouraged the access through here, and we'll talk about that more in detail in a minute. Moving further south from the parking area, you'll see another area of blue. This blue is, these are the utilitarian areas that are needed to serve the functions of the building. That includes trash enclosure, generator enclosure, electrical rooms, and so forth. Now, the alley that comes through we are vacating the portion from our south property line north to Hampton. And we are putting in a 25-foot wide area here that will be under that easement. Now, to recognize the question about whether there can be cut-through traffic here, I suppose ideally someone could in fact do that. That is not our property to the east of the alley. Certainly if we need to put in a ballard or do something of that nature, we could handle that. But I think first that we'd like to see if we can make the project work the way it's been presented. Then if there's an issue, we'll work cooperatively with that adjacent property owner to solve that particular issue. About landscaping, I want to talk about that very briefly. This is an urban site, and when you see our video presentation at the end, you'll see what we're doing. But in plan, we've got a couple of patios, one at the west end and one at the east end. Now, because we are sloping down about 6 feet along this edge, we've got floor steps going down, and we are going to end up with multiple tenants. Our vision for this is that we've got several restaurants. Hopefully a morning restaurant, we'd put that on the east side. Hopefully an evening restaurant, perhaps with the bar, or maybe a very nice coffee shop at the west end. People like to sit in the sun. So what you'll see in our plans are we've got patios on either end, and we believe those patios should contribute toward the landscape requirement. One of the other things that we've done, as you see, as I walk you through the plans, is that we've provided for valet services, valet parking services. When you come to Synergy Medical and you come in underneath the upper level parking where it's covered to the front door, you can choose to either drop off a patient, or you can decide to self-park, or you can decide to use a valet service. The details of the valet services aren't finalized at this point, but we have made provisions for them. One of the things you'll see here, and I'm going to go to the next slide. This is an aerial view of what the project looks from above. So here's our office building, and this is the parking area here. The parking actually extends underneath the building back up in this area. And by doing that, we were able to minimize the impact of the parking. It also gave us, at the top level, what we call the mezzanine level, an access point here. So you will see that. Here's the flat portion of the deck that we mentioned. The other portions are sloped. These are sloping in parallel with the grade that's along Hampton, so it fits very naturally into the site. I'll walk you through the plans here briefly, starting at the lower level. This is a level below grade. You don't see this unless you come into the parking structure. And what you'll see here is we've got circulation that runs around, so you would come in this direction, and we've got parking. All of this north edge we tucked underneath the office building. So the edge of the office building is here above. Now, what's significant about this entire PUD, it was very much about the Rubik's Cube of how do we solve the parking? How do we address it? How do we look at that in concert with all the other uses that we're putting in here and make sure that it worked? What this urban site has as a benefit with that 4,200 person population is, on the other side, an issue where we just don't have a lot of elbow space. The site was 200 by 265 feet after the alley dedication, and in order to make the numbers work, we had to put in all structured parking. Now, that's a significant issue. We are all structured parking. And what you see on this plan is that the greatest number of those parking spaces is below grade. That's a big stroke. That allowed us the flexibility that we needed on top in order to do that. From this level, you can come in directly to the elevator core and come up into the building. There's also another point here where you can come into the building. Coming to grade, I want to go into a little more detail here. This is the retail area that I mentioned before. Here's our primary pedestrian entry. On the west, there's a lobby that comes in here to a core that allows you to get up into the building. This is the other pedestrian entry here. You'll see that here's the crosswalk and the pedestrian sign. So we're bringing people across the street here, here, and into the property, and they can come in into the core. If you are driving into the property, you would come in at this west corner. You can see that there's a valet area here. We have this all slashed because it's a slow driving area. You are undercover. This entire thing is covered. And so you come in at this point undercover. You're able to drop off right at the front door here and come into the project. You'll also notice that all of this area, in fact, has handicapped parking only, so that access is immediately adjacent to the front door. This is the secondary access in, and you actually drive underneath, and then you can ramp up, or you can turn and come down to access the same access point here. So getting into the building was very critical for us in how we connected the dots with all of this blue. Now the alley that we're vacating is here. The dedication for the easement runs east-west here. Along that edge, we put in our 2 utilitarian items. Now this office building, medical office building on the top floor, is contemplating an acute or an ambulatory surgical center. And those are highly sophisticated spaces. They do have emergency generator backup requirements. And so what you see here is a very large generator that is fully enclosed. Next to it is a bottle storage room for oxygen and things of that nature. Then we also have waste disposal that we have to deal with, which include normal waste and sharps and other incidentals that are associated with medical practices. Now, one thing you'll see on this aerial, and we actually put this on the aerial, and it shows that there is currently parking along the south side of Hampton. You'll see that there's also parking along the west side of Pennsylvania and on the west side of Pearl Street. What our PUD application contemplates is that we wanted to eliminate the on-street parking here. What that move did by itself is allow us to put in a left turn pocket both for the eastbound direction turning into the hospital and for traffic coming into our facility, which there currently doesn't exist. So we would put in a left turn pocket here. So the elimination of the on-street parking allows us to reconfigure that street edge. Along Pearl Street, we recommended the same thing, but for a different reason. It did give us the ability to put in 3 lanes here, which allows us to have both a left turn and a through right turn lane, as well as a southbound lane. But it also gave us the room that we need to accommodate 2 additional things. For people who first come to the site, they may or may not know that this is the primary entry. And if they decided to turn in here, there is some very short-term on-street passenger pickup and drop-off parking at that location only. Now, with medical uses come often very fast turnaround, samples, things of that nature that need to be tested. Often those are done by off-site facilities, and so we have by eliminating this parking, we put in some very short-term loading and unloading spaces, and those are intended to be, you need to have a courier come, pick up an x-ray pickup, blood or urine samples or something else. They come into the building, they get that, and then head right out. That can also be done underneath, but we felt that getting rid of that parking would open up the circulation in this area as well, and that would help solve some of the traffic congestion that has been in the area. On this side, we could not do that. we couldn't talk about parking that's on the west side of the street, so we chose not to deal with that. Instead, there was parking here. I think that's sort of parked illegally. I think the parking is only on the west side of the street. So that's how some of the circulation through the project worked. Going up a level, this is what we call our mezzanine level of parking. It is elevated above grade. It is the only above grade parking that we are showing. It does have an access point here that allows you to get directly into the core. There is a dead end area up here with a turnaround that allows people to come back out and then circulate back under and back out. Now, there's another advantage of having this particular configuration with two entrances. If the entry over here at the grade level is our primary Synergy medical office building entry, and that's how we'll address it, you can actually come in over here and get to this other parking level without going through that. And what's nice about that is when you come in and you park here, there's a stair that takes you down to street level and puts you right out, so that if you came to park here after hours to go to a restaurant or to go to retail services, you come down this stair and come right around the edge of the building. Depending on what time of day, you could also come in here, use the internal stair or the internal elevators and go down and access that hallway that continued across and get to either end. Or you can come in to this elevator on the east side and come straight out at street level and get there. So by having the two different entries in the parking structure, it allowed us to sort of manage traffic on site in a manner that was very controllable. Going up through the building, this is a typical floor plate. This is levels 2, 3, 4, and 5. The blue is shown as common area, but that really depends upon the final tenant mix that is there. The corridor may or may not exist. These are the elevations for the project. On the bottom is the Hampton Avenue elevation. Now you'll see here that this is the high point of our site, and we're dropping down about 6 feet to mid-block, and then it levels off across the west portion of the site. At this area, we're approximately 14 feet. By the time we get down here, we are 22 feet. Now that is a signature space for retail. Very nice, dramatic. Higher than this space by far. So it's a very nice area at this, west end. To break the scale down a little bit, we added some canopies here on either end. Then this is our upper level floor plate, and these are all the office plates. We put in a variety of architectural elements that sort of broke down the mass and scale of the building. You can see that on the left we've got some punched openings. We do have ribbon windows here that are similar to what the MOBs have. We separated those with a curtain wall. And again, this is the north side, and our intention was to be all on the street level storefront. This is the Pennsylvania Street elevation. This is our principal entry. And you'll see that above this entry there is a shroud that is metal. It identifies clearly when you look at the building that here's the entry. This area is recessed underneath, which is our exterior patio area. You can kind of see that right here. And then this is the parking structure. This is the mezzanine level here. This is the at grade, and then what you don't see here is all below grade. I'd like to address the issue of the additional parking level that we put in. We currently don't have plans for that, but we are also still courting some very high-end medical providers. If a medical provider said, gee, I'm going to have an intensive staff or something of that nature, and yes, I can afford to pay, it gives the developer the option, not the obligation, but the option to put in an additional parking, and we would do so only up to the extent that that demand was there and necessary. We don't currently see that need, but what we did is put this into the PUD so we had that option. Now, it will not go up more than that one level, and so the building will always be significantly above that. We did that for a couple of reasons. When you see our fly around, you'll note that there's a 3-story apartment building immediately adjacent to the south of us. We didn't want to do anything that would go above the scale of that building. And we felt like we had adequate parking already, so that was more an insurance policy for us to make sure that we had the eventualities needed to cover for our tenant deal making. These are the other two These are the other two elevations. This is the Pearl Street side. Here's our primary entry here. When you turn the corner, this is the drop-off area that I mentioned that you can come in, or you can drive into the parking structure at this point. You'll see it does step down pretty dramatically. This is below the height of the adjacent building that is over here. You'll see that we do have a 75-foot height limitation. The reason we did that was that at 75 feet and above, sort of the high-rise building code requirements come in. We didn't think that that was necessary for this project, and so we were willing to bring the height of that down. We also know that this is up against the street. User-friendliness is an important thing. These are north-facing sidewalks. They're sloping, so the shadows were sort of a big issue to us. So we did look at that very carefully. These are some renderings of the project. This is taken from the intersection of Hampton and Pennsylvania on the west side. You'll see that this is our primary entry element, our primary pedestrian entry. To get into the project, you come in and you turn here. That gets you to that porte-cochere covered drop-off area. You'll see here, this is that patio that we have on the west side. We did give it some sun protection. It's pretty hot today if you're outside, so we're conscious of that. This is that 20-foot plus high storefront area I mentioned that comes down across 14 feet down at this other end. And this is the primary crosswalk that we put in going parallel with Hampton. We did that with staff so that we crossed on the west side here and on the east side over here. This is the view of the project from if you're coming out of Swedish at their main entry. This is the Pearl Street side. Here's this sort of signature shroud that identifies the entry. There's another covered patio here at this location. Now we're stepping down as we get to the flat portion facade. And these are the curtain walls that separate the different articulations we have on the exterior of the building. This is a view taken from Pearl Street looking to the northwest. You'll see Swedish in the background here. This is their primary entry coming into their campus. Here's the covered patio that I mentioned. Here's the upper level parking. So you can come in here, drive in, up this ramp, come down the stair the other side, park in this area, come down a stair right here, and be at the street front area. This is the Pennsylvania Street elevation. You can see Swedish again in the background. This is the upper level parking deck. This is our principal entry. You'd come in down below and you'd either get to covered parking or covered drop-off area there, or on this top level, same place. Come to the building at the same location. The alley that we're putting the easement on is over here to the right. This underneath, these are the utilitarian areas that are needed to serve the building. John, can you cue up the video? We've got a very short fly-through video, a picture's worth 1,000 words kind of thing. and we'll walk you through that. This is the view if you were driving into the project. You can see that there's the patio area to the left. We are now looking at what is the front door, focusing right below the Synergy Medical sign. You can see why we felt like we wanted to have some additional signage to make the signage look commensurate with the scale of the project. As we continue on, we're going to drift a little bit to the right, and you will see the parking structure entry. We've got a canopy there that makes it very clear to people where we are coming into the project. That's our principal entry. You can see Swedish in the background. Off to the right is their parking structure in the background. The scale of our building is commensurate with that. You can hit pause here for a moment. This is the view as if you are driving east to west on Hampton. So the mountains would actually be in the background if we showed them. The parking structure is off to the left. Again, pretty low over here. This shroud is a little different than the one on the other side in that we are showing a glass curtain wall on the east face, and it includes a stair. So even on this side of the building, there's a signature element architecturally that says, here's my front door. It's very difficult, without spending tons of money, to do four-sided architecture well. We believe in this case, we've done that because we found the right balance between the pedestrian, vehicular access, and the uses that we needed. All four sides of this building, I think, look stunning. So I want to thank the team who's pulled this together. Going. A couple other things I'll point out. You're driving into the project now. Where the red car is, that's the principal entry into the parking structure from the Pearl Street side. You can see it's right next to the address or the sign. We want to have it very clear for anyone exactly how they are to wayfind their way itself into this parking structure. Now, when we zoom out, you'll see that the parking structure is pretty low in scale, and because we put over 40% of this parking down below grade, the impact of the parking is very minimal. We're coming up looking through the area along Hampton, and I'd like to pause here at this point. There's a design component that goes well beyond our building. When we walked this area, we said, there's some missing teeth here. If we put a building at this location and we put it on Hampton, it's going to create a very nice forecourt area here to Swedish and give it a little bit of containment. And that says, when you're driving along the corridor, you are at Swedish, you are at Synergy. This is sort of where the medical district is. This is sort of ground zero for that. And we felt that that was an important thing. To the east of that, there's a good level of consistency along the street. There's 3 medical office buildings on the north side, and then there's the parking structure on the south side. Going west, there's MOB4 on the north and future potential development areas in the next 10 years or 20 years or whenever it may happen to the west. And so we felt that that was a pretty important piece of locating this building here. It did give us also a little bit of separation between this and the lower scale buildings, and it placed it shoulder to shoulder with the parking structure. We didn't want the parking structure to be the principal mass along Hampton, but instead we wanted our building to say, hey, we're here, this is a very nice piece of architecture, it's striking, it works with Swedish, and now suddenly the emphasis is not on the parking structure, it's on the south side. go down, we see the lower level areas where we have the pedestrian zone. The site fall was actually is pretty challenging here because we have to have ADA access. We have to have lots of access points. We don't have deals done with all the tenants. They may want to have differing locations for where their entrances are, and yet we still need to have a very nice streetscape. On this west end, we've got enough height where if we get the signature tenant that we think we might get, there's a possibility that they could put in a mezzanine within that space. Again, all this is seen as a lantern to the street. We think it's appropriate. Now, in the essence of time, I want to just summarize, and then we'll get to all of your questions. We have worked pretty diligently with staff on all the utilities. Utility relocates are done consistent with all their standards. It is a non-issue. I hope you can see now why when we first came to staff and we had all of the particular issues to deal with on the potential variances, why we came in with a PUD. This PUD is about creating a project that allows us to create the parking that we need in a very subdued manner that helps build on the urban fabric of and create a hospital district along Hampton Avenue that doesn't exist today. That comes at a hefty price. Because every parking space is a paid-for space in terms of you've got to build a structure. There's no surface parking lot here at all. There's a huge financial premium that comes on that. What this PUD does is allowed us to look at everything in a global manner, site-specific and contextually, with staff to work out all the issues and present a unified plan. We think that is why this is, in fact, a unique project. Again, I want to say thank you to all those who have helped us here. At this point, I think I'd like to just turn it over and answer whatever questions you may have.
Gerald, do you want to start?
I think this is a great project. I think you've what I like is that you've looked at. A lot of times we see projects and they don't really look at what's around it and how it fits in with the context. And I think you've done a really good job with that. And, I think I just give you kudos for that and thank you for presenting.
I don't have any additional questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's really project seems like it's going to be could be a good fit for this. I like some of the architectural elements, especially the unique to it. It seems like that could be a good model for the future. Seeing Swedish setback there, it looks. Kind of wish you were on the street. Could activate that space.
I have 3 pages, but I'll try and keep it short. I think in the staff report it mentioned a 100-foot height limit and also that the 75 feet was to the bottom of the 5th floor. So was the actual structure higher than 75 feet?
Yes. Our top floor is 16-foot floor-to-floor plus a parapet height. Now, one thing I didn't mention is that above that, but stepped back, we have an architectural screen wall. Right now, that screen wall is shown at 14 feet high in your plan set. However, we're working diligently to bring that down. We really only kind of want that to be high enough to screen all the mechanical equipment that's going to be there. We need some flexibility there because equipment is changing, and because on our top floor we have an ambulatory surgical center, all of that equipment is not yet known. So this screen wall that you see up there is actually bigger than we might normally put into an office building this size. And so we made it a little bit taller so it proportionally felt appropriate to the rest of the building. But we would actually like to bring it down.
Okay. Just wondering, you talk a lot in the application and things like that about really trying to enhance the pedestrian environment. It seems very auto-oriented, just with reducing a lot of the on-street parking and that sort of thing. I was also wondering, was there any consideration on Pennsylvania, the entrance and exit out of the parking garage, to move that onto the alley so there wasn't as many curb cuts along Pennsylvania and to not reduce as many parking spots?
Yes, very good question, and simple answer. We wanted to have a simple movement into the parking structure. If we put ourselves in the position of those who might be coming here for the first time, or for patrons who are used to surface parking, sometimes a parking structure can seem unknown to them. We wanted to make that access very simple. But we also wanted to have several answers. That was the primary driver for why we put the access in where we did on Pearl Street. We also wanted to have an architectural element at that entry. Coming in off of the alley doesn't provide us that, and the alley, even though it's 25 feet wide, 16 feet of that is for public two-way access, but the other 9 feet of that we are reserving for long-term loading. So will come and they will actually park up against that south wall. Don, can you get us to a point where we can look at that? So if we were to zoom in here, you can see that in the dark gray there's a sweep here that was required for the turning of the vehicles. And this area here is the 16-foot wide alley that has the two-way traffic. Resulting 9 feet right here is where we're providing our off-street loading, because we do have restaurants, we do have retail. Sometimes those deliveries take a while. We needed that to be somewhere out of the way. That, coupled with the fact that we've got all these utilities that we had to put someplace, kind of drove us to only one location, and that is to come off of the street.
You mentioned in the drawing set that there's a proposal to relocate the bus stop that's directly in front of the building right now. Whose proposal is that, and is RTD leading that, and has there been public input into that as well?
We initiated that, and part of the reason is that, well, several reasons. The bus stop currently is right here, and people would get off the bus at this location and instantly want to kind of cut across the street up that sidewalk to the front door Swedish. We didn't like that situation. So we reached out to RTD and said, you know, if you put that bus stop right here, people can get out here. There's already the signalized safe pedestrian crossing light here and a crosswalk. They said, you know, that's actually better. We can get out on the right side and come in right here, where all the traffic is also coming through from their parking structure. So RTD did like that idea. One of the things that we have to be conscious about is the construction process. We recognize that there are emergency vehicles and people rushing to the hospital, and we need to keep these roads open. So we need a little bit of elbow room to get that done and keep those traffic lanes open. So relocating that bus stop allows us a lot of freedom in exercising our construction and trying to minimize, we want to minimize the time frame of that as much as possible. In terms of public input, I'm not aware that there was any. By RTD standards, we can make a formal request to relocate it. They come out and survey the property. They did. They agreed with it. We then took on the engineering responsibility to make sure that the bus stop that was being put in here would work according to their standards. There is some slope to that street as well, and you have to have the 2% maximum slope to that. So we did actually have to work to put in a small retaining wall and to reconfigure the walks in that area for that to occur. But in terms of public input, There were no public forums or meetings, if you will.
Other thing that was I think it's maybe the crosswalks that you're mentioning. I'm not sure if it's the ones going east-west or north-south, but that they would be proposed by the PUD but not required. And trying to think of what section that was in.
We had some roundabouts with staff on that, and differences, happen. We originally were proponents of having a crosswalk here, and here, where all of them had these type of safety crosswalk markings on them, because this is a stop sign controlled intersection, and same thing at Pennsylvania Street. That's a stop sign controlled intersection. So we felt, well, if you're coming up here, you wanted to go to Swedish, why have to cross the street and come this way? But in discussion with staff, we agreed to eliminate this one here and the other one on Hampton, stretch our access east-west, and cross at these two locations only. So we took no exception to that. In the end, we thought that that was a fair compromise.
So then are you proposing to improve the crosswalks across Pennsylvania and Pearl?
No, we are only improving from back of curb and in on our property, not beyond, other than the street restriping. We do have new crosswalk striping that it will occur at this location and at this location, but since that already exists and that already exists and those are to remain, that work's not included.
That's all I have for now.
Got most of my questions just then. The parking structure, it's open to the public. It is not a pay structure.
It is an open structure. Whether there's a pay component to it or not, ultimately, I do not know. If you are a patient, you can drive into that portico area free of charge. There is a security gate that we have made a provision for to secure the entire lower level. Whether or not that is monetized based through leases with doctors or anything else, I don't know. Certainly, some doctors drive some nice cars and they want to make sure that they're protected and secured. Sometimes that comes with a price. But the intention certainly is that for that top level, when you come and you want to go to a restaurant or a retail space, you can drive in, walk down the stair, and be right at their front door.
Okay. You got the alley stuff. No, I'm fine.
I have a few things. My two biggest concerns are the amount of parking, because part of this is getting rid of 58 spaces that is currently being used between 32 for the Valet for Swedish, 14 for regular people that are visiting Swedish, plus 12 handicapped. And that lot is completely full. It's that lot that's on the east end of. And so I understand that Swedish Craig is putting in another parking structure further up Hampton, further east on Hampton. But that, to me, is in reaction to the current parking problem. And I think that by getting rid of an additional 58 spaces, plus all of the street parking that you're talking about, I understand the need for the loading zones and that sort of thing, but I would highly encourage that fourth level of the parking structure be included in the PUD. To talk about the question of the doctor's parking, that the bottom floor of the parking structure to the east on Swedish has doctor parking only on the bottom level. So potentially the doctors could park their fancy cars there and not have to worry about them. And the second is the calculation of the landscaping requirement. You excluded from that common areas, walls, shafts, vertical cores, structure, elements, corridors, and bathrooms to come up with your landscaping requirement. The south side is, to me, that is a little bit barren. I think that there could be some landscaping, tree elements, shrubs, that sort of thing incorporated on the top level of the parking structure. I also think that there could be additional shrubbery and things like that along Hampton Avenue to soften the project. And those are my two biggest concerns. One final concern is that normally in medical buildings, the bottom floor is reserved exclusively for equipment like X-ray equipment and things like that that need to be extremely stable and not get any movement from the street. You're smiling, so you know what I'm talking about. And I don't see that incorporated in the plan at all. Perhaps it's something that's going to be incorporated in the separation of floors above, or I'll let you speak.
Okay, 3 items. Let me first talk about the parking. The cost of the parking on this particular project is significant. We've worked very diligently both with our consultant teams and with staff and the hospital to come up with what is the right amount of parking. We do not yet know the exact tenant mix that we'll have on the first floor. If you ask our expert opinion, we'll give you an opinion, but an expert is just that, it's an opinion. We think that about 50% of that 14,000 square feet, about 7,000 square feet, will be restaurants. Now, on the parking count, for the bulk of the project, we maintain the parking count of the city code for all the medical office. That's by and large the biggest chunk of this. For the retail, we meet that as well. The discount for the parking is on the restaurant. But where that comes in is that we've got the 4,200 person population across the street that we think is going to walk there and get rid of all those trips. And so we think we're actually in a surplus of parking, essentially. We don't want to put in any more of the structured parking, which comes at a very high price and is necessary. Certainly, our team wants to make sure that this project is extremely successful, and I said earlier that we wanted this to be a self-sustaining project. We didn't want to add to any of the burdens that could be perceived out in the district, and so we think we have found that, and it has taken us quite a while. We think we've actually hit a bullseye there. We're not just on target. We think we're really right on. So the only place we're really asking for a discount is on the parking ratio for that restaurant component, which is only half of that first floor retail. You're very astute about the...
But you would acknowledge that that's a significant discount that you're asking for, from going from 1 per 100 square feet to 1 parking space for 600 square feet. That's a pretty big difference.
If you look at it on a ratio basis, but if you look at it on the size of the project, it's not. According to, the code, the way it was calculated, if that were all restaurant, it would be 140 parking spaces. But it's not going to be that. So you cut that in half and it's 70, and we're asking for 24. And so it's a very reasonable reduction that we're asking. That's a critical issue to us because we're paying the premium to put all of these in a structured parking, and we're putting 40% of them below grade. Now that is a huge benefit.
It's very expensive, I agree.
And a huge benefit to the district. And a typical building with a developer who didn't have vision to do that might have had a 5-story office building on one side of the alley and a 5-story office parking structure on the other side. And we would have lost that entire lantern to the street. We would have lost the mix of uses. We would have lost all the flexibility we have. We would have had now higher mass next to residential areas. So the big win for us is that we've come up with this PUD and solved the parking issue. You also mentioned what typically comes along with medical is imaging equipment. That's why I smiled. And that equipment is very sensitive to vibration, as you know. We are planning a beefed-up structure right now to incorporate that, or the surgical center, which has the similar type of characteristics on the top floor. What you don't see in the PUD is that we are doing a post-tension concrete structure up to that bottom office floor and steel from there up. And that mass at the bottom helps the vibration issues. And there's less vibration introduced into the structure because of the parking structure. It's all one structure. So we really had to pay attention to that. In terms of not having it on the first floor, that's quite intentional. We want people, we want activity, we want to connect the dots along between Pearl Street and Pennsylvania and have that be a very lively area. You know, Brook mentioned the transparency issue when it came to the first floor, and the intention of that part of the zoning code is to keep you from having blank wall. And we think that this project is going to address that very nicely. Again, coming at a significant price, but we think that in the long term, it's the right approach for the district.
I would agree with you, and I probably should have prefaced my remarks by saying that I think you've put an extraordinary amount of thought into this project, and it shows. I like the overall design. I just wanted to express my concerns. I guess I come back to that parking issue because the PUD does allow staff to come in and reduce the amount of parking by 5% without making any changes to the PUD. And so that sort of, to me, is a big red flag.
Well, also note that we exceeded the parking requirement for the PUD. I think it's 280. We're providing 293.
Versus 281, I think, something like that.
281. And, you know, we need a little bit of flexibility as we develop our plans and come up with a final solution, but certainly our intention is to get as many parking spaces as we can out of the shoulders of the project.
Was the person who owns the salon on the south side at the community meetings?
I believe, yes, she was at the second meeting that was held at the Acoma Center, and we did have conversations. I think the concern that she had was, hey, if you're cutting off the alley, how do I get to the back of my property for parking access? And we explained that the alley's not going away. It's simply being reconfigured, and you would still have access to the back of your property. We're not touching or impacting her property at all. And so once we explained that, I think it was good. Now, we do recognize that we're going to have to keep that alley open throughout the duration of the construction process. And we are planning on that. There's some logistics involved with that, so we are going to have to be good neighbors to the surrounding property owners, and our contractor is quite skilled at, you know, addressing those concerns and coming up with the solutions that are needed to make this project happen in a very friendly manner for the community.
Okay, and then my final question, if you recall, was about perhaps some additional landscaping in the parking lot on the top floor, or is that just impossible because of irrigation issues and things like that?
It's very difficult.
Okay.
On the south side, again, you're bringing things that I didn't mention, trying to be brief. John, can you go to that plan? Go down 3 slides, please. What you don't see in this area is that it's chock full of utilities underground. There is an existing sanitary line here that is moving over this direction and then being rerouted up along the west side. What I didn't mention is that there's a huge underground detention vault.
Right.
That's
Saw that in the plans, yeah.
right at this area. We're looking at other solutions for that right now. And then the final item that's in there is that there is a very large grease trap Now, we worked carefully with, I can't remember the name of the new district, but the Littleton Inglewood Wastewater Treatment District and Hope Dalton to come up with a managed grease waste plan that allowed us to put in a single managed grease trap that could be used by multiple tenants, as opposed to their policy of having a separate grease trap per tenant. So we still have a bigger trap and it's managed, and we're very grateful for the cooperation that we got there. The point is, there's reasons we don't have landscaping there.
Okay.
And it's going to be very difficult for us to do that. I hear your concern. We'll certainly take a look at that around the perimeter of the property as we develop our plans.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Ellermann, thank you so much for your extensive discussion, especially on how the traffic moves and everything like that. I have a few questions about that. On the East Hampton Avenue, where you're proposing the 2 left turn lanes, how long are those, and how many cars would be able to fit in each of them? I'm thinking about, will they stack up, and your traffic study, just any thoughts on just how efficiently that will work?
We talked to the traffic consultant about that issue, and right now those left turn pocket lanes don't exist in both directions. They're approximately a third the length of the block, and the block is about 275 feet long. How many cars? Typically, if you have about 20, 25 feet per car, you might have 3 or 4 cars that stack there. Both intersections, however, are stop sign controlled intersections 3 ways. So there's a nice gap so that people will take turns with their traffic movements aside from pedestrian crossing. And so we think that it's appropriate. We got the report back, and it was a level of service A through C at the worst case. So it was an improvement to the corridor, and so we were very pleased with that. It was actually a little surprising for us once we added those pockets what it did for our level of service.
Along that north face, you have a nice transparent wall there, in essence, that will house a number of retail units. According to the drawings, you have like maybe 4, 5, 6 being along there. I know you don't really know, but that's what the pictures you've shown so far. Are there? I wasn't quite clear. Are there no entrances on that side, or is all the entrance only from inside the building?
No, very good question. John, can you go to our front elevation or even the video to show? We can talk about that. Each individual tenant along there will have its own access directly from Hampton.
Okay.
The end cap tenants on the east and west that have the patios may have a secondary entrance to those locations. All the tenants are connected on our plan inside with that corridor that stretches from street to street. So the advantage of that corridor is that not only does it provide us with a second means of egress in case of emergency, but if you are in the office building, if you're a doctor and you've got precious little time and you've got a patient coming, but you need to get down and get a sandwich, you can take the elevator down the corridor, go back in the back door of that particular establishment, and come right back up the building, never go outside in the freezing cold. So although those kind of access issues are ultimately reserved for the tenants themselves, we've provided for that opportunity. But yes, each tenant has the ability to put their own front door in, their own branding with the signage. We want there to be some activity across there. We don't want this to be a corporate look. We want each tenant to be able to put a sign in a door and some graphics that says, hey, here's who I am compared to someone else. And so yes, there's a lot of flexibility there. We can move doors as tenant churn happens. So if we look out over a period of years and the first generation of tenants rolls over and something else happens, or 2 tenants become one larger tenant, we can move doors around and repair that storefront.
I'd say again, you do have an elegant plan. It's been well thought out. I will echo that. The conundrum I have is threefold. I don't believe that there should be a PUD process according to the rules of PUD. So that's a kind of a stickler. It's a procedural thing. I understand, your discussion about why you did that, but I just want to, lay it out there that this doesn't meet the criteria for PUD because there's nothing unique about its property. In fact, it's a really nice piece of property, and the whole point and purpose of a PUD is not to make it easier for you and the staff to put a project together. It's to address problematic properties with custom zoning. So I have, that's a stumbling block for me. Second, I have the same issues with landscaping and parking. Landscaping, it's almost non-existent, and in essence, you got a great project that's has all these concessions from the city, reduced landscaping, reduced parking, increased signage, reduced setbacks, which all make for a great project. I mean, I get that entirely, that this is a great deal for you, but my problem is that does impact the area. And while you say you have sufficient parking, I walk through that area because I live in that area. I know it's congested. I know that you're going to impact it in a negative way with the parking because you're removing a bunch of parking. You're adding a bunch of parking. You're simply adding a bunch of other stuff too. So it's bound to do that. The landscaping is probably even more. You kind of said, oh, it's an urban place, but again, I walk that area frequently. And directly across the street from you is Swedish Entrance. And guess what? It's full of green space right across the street from you. And if you walk the area, you see, the sculptures that have been put in by Craig and the open spaces. Every building, every complex along that entire corridor has managed somehow to do landscaping, but for some reason you can't.
Mr. Fish,
And that,
respectfully, do you have a question for the applicant?
What I'm saying is that it doesn't pass the smell test, and that I think if you want all these concessions, I think there should be other concessions that you could make to the city. So I don't have a question per se. What I'm saying is that you're getting a whole lot and not giving much back, and you're piggybacking on a lot of other people in the area. Yet the conundrum is you have an elegant project that is really nice. And so not so much a question as just a statement that I don't think these things have been adequately addressed by you or the staff. And so that makes it hard for me to be in agreement with it.
Noted.
Great.
Thank you.
Very much. Okay, now we have an opportunity for some public testimony. Do we have public present in the sign-up sheet? And then anyone in the audience from the public that would like to speak that hasn't signed up? Okay. And then do we have anything else we want to add from staff?
I just wanted to see, I think Mr. Ellermann addressed that parking question in terms of what the difference would be if it was M2 zoning with the increased restaurant rate. Was that answered adequately by Mr. Ellermann?
I still don't know what I mean.
Okay.
The 281 is based on the
Okay, so
the consultant's thing, but what would be an M2 requirement?
So the actual amount of square footage of that restaurant/retail is 13,103 square feet as opposed to 14,000 because you take out hallways, bathrooms, closets, things like that. So, of that 14,000, which is actually 13,103, if it were all restaurant, that would yield 131 spaces in the M2 zone district under the current zoning. If it were all retail, that same square footage, it would 22 spaces would be required, and that current retail amount is what the PUD asks for both retail and restaurant. So the difference between 131 spaces and 22 spaces is 109 spaces. So that's how much that reduction is. So then if you take the 281 spaces and add, at very worst case scenario, if it were 100% restaurant, that would create a required parking of 390 spaces, and 293 are provided. So that's a difference of 97 spaces. Again, if it's 100% restaurant. If it's even half restaurant and half retail, the difference in the amount of spaces is half that, which is about 58 and a half spaces. So that's the long answer, or short answer, to that amount of parking reduction. And again, the parking reduction is based on that sort of captive population there of 4,200 people that are likely going to not be parking necessarily to go to work or to go to one of the hospitals or the medical office building, and then getting out and reparking to go to lunch. So that's that question. And I just wanted to touch on one of the other things that Gary mentioned. And a PUD is a PUD rezoning it provides an opportunity for a unified development and control and a holistic look at a project or control of a number of multiple properties or multiple uses, more so than the base district zoning code does. The base district zoning code pays much less credence to this more holistic view, and it looks very specifically and very narrowly at setbacks, certain numbers, and a PUD sort of goes beyond it. We see that as an opportunity. Variances tend to be more about actually the negative aspects of a property. You have to meet 4 criteria to get a variance passed. The two hardest of which are one, that unique physical conditions exist on the properties, like size, shape, or the existing or location of existing structures that actually deprive the applicant of privileges enjoyed by other properties in the area. One of the other criteria for variances is that it's not a self-imposed difficulty or hardship. So that's a very high standard and doesn't take as holistic of a view as a PUD does. So I just wanted to mention that. That's all I have.
Anything further from the applicant?
Hearing the concern about the parking, one thing that I failed to mention is that when we did the shared parking analysis and we looked at the different uses, there was also a sharing of the same parking space that allowed us to come in with a high level of confidence that we were providing the right number of parking spaces. For example, right now, everything in that district pretty much is all medical-based, and there's a surge of traffic, especially during the day when visitation hours are the highest. What we are providing is all of that parking requirement for the medical use totally contained in our site. But the evening uses that people don't come to during the day, we've got restaurants. And I mentioned that we expect at least 7,000 square feet or half of that retail space to be restaurants. For those people who don't walk across the street, those people come in from other areas after hours. We don't need to pay for 2 parking spaces when the same parking space can be shared by 2 different uses at 2 different times a day. So that was considered when we did the shared parking analysis and first brought the letter to staff and said, here's what the experts said. Certainly that was not done by us, but by an independent third-party consultant who specializes in that. So I just wanted to make that clarification that certainly different uses do help us. I don't want to address the technical issues of whether this is a PUD or not. I will say that we have overcome a lot of issues with staff over the course of 2 years in a very cooperative manner. We could not have presented this project to you at the cost of this project with any uncertainty related to any of the individual variances. Just couldn't happen. So we do encourage you to, and we do seek an approval this evening, and look forward to it. Thank you.
We have a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
This is just a vote.
Yes.
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 Yes. Do we have a motion?
Yes. I move that we forward with a positive recommendation to council the approval of the PUD here in case ZON 2018-001 as written.
Can open up discussion on the motion. Anyone want to start with discussion? Would you like to run?
Well, I think it's an elegant project, and I love it. I just have some concerns about all the concessions that are being made, and of course the technical issue of a PUD. I hate to see PUDs being increasingly, apparently it's the staff's wish to use the PUD process in a number of different ways, and I don't think it was designed for that, but clearly it's worked well here, as staff has pointed out. So I do have trouble with that. I would like, considering all the concessions that have been made on the regular zoning, I think it would be nice to have at least one thing that I can think of that would be nice, and that would be that because of the nature of how it's going to be structured and the closing, the vacation of the alley, and then the creation of another alley, you end up with that L-shaped alley now where you've got the alley going down towards Hampton, and it's dirt. I think it would be a very nice gesture on the part of the developer to pave that, because I think it will be increased utilization because of all of the traffic. That loading dock is going to see a lot of stuff, and there's bound to be some traffic come in from the south as opposed to everything from the west, though that would be the predominant entrance. But difficult for me to.
Is that something you want to amend your motion with, or not yet, or not at this time?
I would rather hear from the commissioners. If there's no point in amending it if there's no support for it. So I think we're open to have some flexibility there. Perhaps someone else has something else they'd like to amend it as well. So I'd rather hear discussion if there is any. But I think that would be something that would be very nice to not just nice. I think it would be very. It would benefit the area because I think there will be increased traffic in that alley because of the structure.
I agree with Ron's comment that this is a very elegant solution. I do struggle with the same issues that you do regarding the parking and the landscaping. I also have to recognize that something's going to go there, no matter what. Go back to the whole Kent Place PUD that happened years ago. I mean, the neighbors were all up in arms, but it finally came down to that something had to be there. So I would agree with you that it would be a nice gesture and a neighborly gesture to have that the alley paved or asphalt or something. And I would like to have the other commissioners entertain an amendment to require the 4th level of the parking structure. But I will take the same tactic. I'll just wait for further comment rather than make an amendment to the motion.
Okay.
From my perspective, what I saw was a significant effort to make a proposal with a limited number of limitations on variances. So I just looked at the same situation differently than you. And that's sort of what I heard tonight, that there was a approach by the planners and the developers to put together a project that was, the word that was used was subdued. But I saw that across the board in the variances that are requested as part of the PUD. Planning is incredibly thoughtful. Obviously, there was a huge amount of time and effort that went into it in a way that is unique for PUD and plans that I've seen from projects that have been brought to Inglewood. The variance issue to me is, Ron, I hear what you're saying, but I don't see the PUD approval process. The issue that you're raising, I looked at the code again to see, and when I look at the code, it's consistent with what Brooke said, that there is a mechanism for approving a PUD that occurs when a property can't be developed, but there's also a mechanism for approval of a PUD under different circumstances. And I think it's important to look at both parts of the code where a PUD is allowed. And I don't think, like you, I was on the Board of Adjustment and Appeals. I don't think most of these variances would be approved because they are self-created. So there's not really any other way to be able to do a development on 6 lots with probably 24 different variances.
Okay. I think this project exceeds our design standards. It's a great design, and I think that the large number of variances, they could warrant a PUD. So I would go with that. I think paving the alley would be fantastic, considering all the parking that was vacated on Pearl. I would go with that. I would not go with the 4th floor requirement. I think that's an undue burden. Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to look at this a little bit more holistically as I consider, A, should it be a PUD or should it go under an existing zoning ordinance? And what appears to me is when I look at this more holistically, I ask myself, well, okay, so on the first floor of buildings generally, in this general type of zone, we would like to see alternative commercial uses. One of them would be a restaurant. Okay? And yet, for some reason, when we have a developer who has 14,000 square feet of what we're looking for generally along Broadway and in this corridor, somehow we have a problem with that. And I think, well, is it because of the parking? And then I know that within the last 2 months we've discussed this vast sea of asphalt in Inglewood relative to commercial parking by requiring one car or one space for every 100 square feet. And I think to myself, this doesn't exist in a bubble. It exists within Inglewood, and this is exactly this mixed-use parking that we've discussed within the last 60 days. And I believe we had consensus that we would move forward, Brooke, and if I'm wrong, correct me, but we would move forward to do something where it was, 200 feet or pardon me, 400 feet of one space for every 400 feet, given the fact that not everybody shows up as if it's Christmas time, right? And so I look at this and I think to myself, okay, the ordinance doesn't allow us to do that, and zoning doesn't allow us to do that. The ordinance doesn't allow us, or the zoning does not allow us to have 14,000 square feet, yet it meets our goals. When I think about great places to go eat in Inglewood, I wouldn't mind having other alternatives. We'll leave it at that. And no disparaging remarks regarding any particular vendor at this point. We didn't have a discussion about a 20-foot setback after 60 feet. And so apparently we're all okay with that variance, okay? But I don't know that, to Merck's point, that we would have the Board of Adjustments would have any criteria by which, because it's self-inflicted, but yet we're good with that because relative to the structures around it, it fits. Going through each one of these things, it just seems to me that it's, first of all, it's a great development. I'm excited to see it happen. I do like the idea of having a paved area because, to Ron's point, the north-south, what otherwise today would be a relatively quiet alley, can get very dusty very quickly with heavy traffic to deliver whatever goods and services are necessary for this particular structure. So I would like to have a discussion about that. I believe I'd support that, at least some fashion of how can we make a turnaround or something. And I'm not a trucking or transportation expert. I worked in it years ago. That was it. Okay, but enough of that. Just had a flashback. And I think the risk relative to not having this as a PUD, our code doesn't allow us to do this development. And so our choice is to put a developer at a great deal of risk of having to redesign things to meet any combination thereof that would or would not be approved moving forward. So I think it does make a great deal of sense, to Merck's point, on the other side of the code that allows us the opportunity to do this. I think it's a great development. I hope it passes.
Yeah, I echo a lot of the comments that have already been stated just about the quality of the project and the thought that's gone through it. So we certainly appreciate that and are appreciative that you guys have looked to Inglewood as a home for this project, because I think it's a community that needs more of this. Certainly the restaurants, more good restaurants and retail in that area, I think will help livening the space. In terms of the PUD issue, I did not see it as a concern. I certainly think the variances issues that we've talked about have made the PUD the right path, but I don't think the commission either needs to be afraid to go down the PUD route. It is a tool that can be used to look at these projects in a holistic manner and develop them to what the market wants and to what the community needs. And I don't think we need to be too concerned about new colors showing up on the zoning map over there. I think this is what a PUD can be used for, to the benefit of the city. So I think that's something we should consider. As far as the parking ratio, my recollection was right on with yours, and I was going to state that, is that we were talking about lowering that parking ratio for restaurants anyway because it's far too high. So I have no issue with the reduction in the parking. I don't think it's going to be a concern. They've done studies. They considered the shared parking. So I wouldn't push for requiring that fourth deck. I think that could be an issue for them in terms of financing the project. So I would not support that. In terms of landscaping, didn't have an issue with that either. They can do janitors and the glass structure on there looks good. I personally think that looks kind of odd the way the Swedish has that hole there with the parking. So on the whole, I think it's a great project.
I agree. I think it's a great project. I'm not going to spend a lot of time other than I agree that the parking is sufficient. I like the shared parking idea, and I agree in my short time on the commission, we've already talked about reducing the requirements for parking for restaurants. I don't have a problem with that, and I don't think that you should bear the burden of an additional level from a cost perspective. I'm a little bit at odds with the alley. I do agree. So I guess I didn't ask a better clarifying question about deliveries. I happen to have family members who deliver for food company, and getting 18-wheel trucks, which is what they deliver, and unless they're in downtown Denver, to deliver food to restaurants, there is going to be blocking of traffic when they do. They won't be able to get in that alley, so I'm not quite as concerned about the alley because there's no way those delivery trucks are going down that alley. But they're also not going in the alley you've created for delivery. So it's just a comment. It's not, I think we may find that at some point there's going to be some traffic issues with delivery trucks. But other than that, I think it's a fabulous project. I'm thrilled to see something of this nature going in that place. And from my new reading of PUD requirements, my understanding was this was exactly what a PUD is for. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I'll just say that I am pretty well convinced that the parking shouldn't be an issue. I think you've explained that well. And I think, with the thought you've gone into it, if it does become a problem, I trust that you will address it because we have approved some projects in the past that we were assured parking wouldn't be a problem, and it has been. So that would be my only concern. But I think this is a great project. I do agree that you've got a lot of pedestrians already on the site that will serve the retail, and I think I don't really have any other concerns. Thanks.
Great. I agree. I think it looks like a very nice, high-quality project, and I think that by requiring the different kinds of textures and materials and things like that through the PUD process, as well as like the additional community engagement pieces and things like that, that we have an opportunity to get a higher quality project than with the base zoning. I do not have an issue with the number of parking spaces in the structured parking garage as is. I'm not happy about removing any parking spaces from the street, and I would like to see that limited as much as possible. I would definitely have a concern, since you do not know who the tenants are that would be coming into those retail and restaurant spaces, that perception of lack of parking because you have nothing right in front could be a concern. But other than that, I don't have anything else.
If I could, Madam Chair, to Ron's comment, I would like to amend this. Not that we're going to engineer this at this spot, but so that we have a formal record of the conversation regarding the pavement in that alley section back there, for the purposes of, and I'm not an engineer, but for the purposes of memorializing that, I would ask if we could amend this move. Well, that would require me to actually formalize my thoughts. I'd like to see an amendment whereby we would move to approve an amendment to have staff and the developer look at paving the lot relative to being able to accommodate some deliveries, I guess, in a more formalized fashion, or something that's going to provide that ground surface. in the area where deliveries can happen.
I think the best way to approach that is that we have basically two ideas on the floor. One is to require the paving of the alley that goes from the building to the south, which is currently the whole alley is dirt, but they're going to vacate part of it. I think we should make that a separate, again, I like your idea, Mike, is that I think we should make a motion to amend that one thing. I think we should also make a motion to require the fourth-story parking, and that way the commission can decide if it wants to do that or not, so that's in the record as well. That would be my proposal, that we put both those things on the floor for separately, to vote on them separately as amendments to the current motion. That way the viewpoint of the commission will be expressed. I mean, again, we're recommending this to the council. They can remove those if they choose to.
I'm just trying to think procedurally, if we vote on them separately.
To make an amendment, friendly amendment, which I forgot who seconded the motion. Oh, did he make a motion? He made a motion. Oh, okay. Okay, quasi motion. I'm sorry. Okay, well, I'll second it. Right. Correct. Okay.
Call the roll on that. I feel we can have additional discussion, but it feels as though people have already voiced their views on that piece. So
I only had one question. The only question I have is more legal because the city owns. I don't know who owns the right of way. It's either the city or the property owners. So the way that Mike originally phrased it was that if there would be a discussion. I don't know that we can make. I don't know if the city wants it. If the owners want it. Before we say we've got to make somebody. I think paving is a great idea, but we just need to do something.
I don't think we need to worry about that because, again, it's a recommendation on our part. It's not a requirement. I mean, we're recommending, the council will decide that, and they'll either reject it or retain it, and they'll have, legal advice on how to do that. So I don't think we're really, forcing anybody to do it yet. We're just saying this is our opinion, our viewpoint. This should be paved because of potential traffic. So I don't think there's a real issue, really. Could it or could not be done. I don't think we need to decide that.
Is Dugan forming some words over there? Or
I mean, we just had a discussion earlier with Eric about how the whole city wants to pave all the alleys. I don't think there's going to be a little opposition to this.
That's the point. The city owns the alleys, so they can
Right.
make that choice.
Yeah.
It's weird for us to be telling someone that doesn't own property that they need to go pave property that somebody else owns.
No, I think we're just saying this development is occurring, and we think this should be an aspect of it because the development impacts the area. And there's going to be traffic on that alley because of the development. And so, therefore, it should be paved to mitigate dust and stuff. And we know, like the salon, that's their primary access for certain activities. They don't have any other way to get to that backyard. I mean, I looked at them today. You have to go to that alley to get to the back side of that salon.
We're on the same page on that.
Okay.
That's something.
All right.
Yes.
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 So, would you like to make?
Yes, I'd like to offer an amendment to require the developer to install the fourth level of the parking garage.
Second?
I second.
Any additional discussion? Okay.
The only, I'm sorry.
This one, I mean, I definitely understand the parking issue, but without knowing the costs, all I know is that parking is very expensive. But without a lot more information on what this would cost for the development and whether there's a benefit to the community that's commensurate with the cost, I don't feel like the only thing I can really say is no, because I don't have enough information to that the cost is worth the
Just to echo that, I've heard estimates of $100,000 plus per space, and the developer has already said that based on the tenants that they would have, if they land a tenant that would presumably be a higher traffic tenant, and they could work some deal that would be economically feasible, then in approving this, we also have the understanding that within that PUD, they could add that. To require that and then have it sit empty may, I think, to the previous point, make this all this effort a moot point.
Call the roll.
No, for the reasons so eloquently spoken.
No.
No.
Yes.
No.
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 I could always call my wife, but no. I could phone a friend.
No. Do we have additional discussion on the current motion? Okay. I think we're ready.
No.
This would be, we just want to remind commissioners that this is the part where you want to give a little bit more information about your vote, and this is for the vote to essentially approve or deny.
Okay, I'm sorry. I lost track. I think this is a great development, and I vote yes. I'm falling asleep.
I vote yes. The first approval criteria we have to evaluate is whether the proposed development complies with all applicable use standards set forth in the code. It doesn't change the applicable use. The only real change is that residential is allowed under the code, but that is eliminated from the PUD. That's a reduction in uses. The second that we have to evaluate is whether the proposed development complies with the development standards. There are some changes to the development standards, and in my opinion, the 6 changes that are being requested are relatively minimal. What I saw through the presentation, that where those requests are made, I did not see a development where the planners and the developers were trying to push the envelope in terms of what's allowed within the development, but we're making a concerted effort to create a new development that complied with most of those, and that they made an effort to limit the changes to the current development standards that are in place. Design standards in the code basically don't exist, and within the PUD plan there are design and contextual standards that are put into place, both in the PUD and in the design for the building, that improve what's allowed. The second thing that we have to evaluate is whether the proposed rezoning meets one of the following criteria. And I find that 1A is satisfied, both parts of 1A. The first is that the proposed 1A, one is that the proposed development exceeds the development quality standards, levels of public amenities, and levels of design innovation, otherwise applicable under the code. There are architectural control standards that are put into place through the PUD. Three examples of those that I saw were the high ceilings on the first floor, the entries with design elements highlighting that those are the entries, and a mix of material patterns throughout the building, both on the eastern western sides to minimize the impact of the building on the surrounding neighborhood. The context of the neighborhood was summarized and was included in the planning process and given considerable thought. There was lighting plan, signage plans, landscaping plans, where from my perspective what I saw was that the developers and planners took a considerable amount of time and effort to make sure that they were consistent with the code. So for those reasons I found that the first part of 1A was satisfied. The second part of 1A that has to be satisfied is that the proposed development would not be allowed or practicable under a standard zone district with conditional uses or a reasonable number of zoning variances or administrative adjustments. On that issue, I don't think that the 6 changes could be addressed with administrative adjustments. I don't think that any of them would have been allowed as variances because most of those were self-created. What I saw was a plan to develop 6 different lots that isn't appropriate for the variances, and that there was effort through the planning process to be able to eliminate variances that were required and to minimize what was being asked through the PUD. So for those reasons, I found that 1A was satisfied and that proposed rezoning met the first part of the test that we have to evaluate. The second part is that all rezonings shall meet evaluate whether they meet the following criteria: that the property as rezoned will not have a significant negative impact on the property surrounding the rezoned area, and the general public health, safety, and welfare of the community will be protected. When I look at what's proposed, I don't see that there may be some impact on Swedish's property to the north, but it would be relatively minimal and not something that would qualify as significantly negative. The property to the east is a parking lot, so I did not see a significant negative impact on that property. The property to the west also didn't see a significant negative impact. If there is a negative impact, it might be to the properties to the south. One of those ways that could be alleviated was through the amendment that we approved to be able to pave the alley. The impacts on general public health, safety, and welfare of the community I thought were thoroughly addressed through the traffic study and the effort that was put in to minimize traffic, to set up traffic so that it's on the east and western sides of the project, to be able to protect, to minimize the impact on pedestrians, the effort that was made to be able to move the bus stop in a way that was increased safety for pedestrians and people traveling on buses. And one concern that I had was about the sanitary sewer line in the alley not being under the building, and that was addressed. Other than, for all of those reasons, I found that both 1A and 2 of the code were satisfied, and that the PUD should be approved.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I'm not, actually, let me just...
Part 2.
Then we also have to evaluate whether it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. I find that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. One of the goals that we're trying to achieve is development of the medical industry in this area. It does that. One of the things that we want to try and foster is a development of jobs in multiple areas. This has every type of job category from a barista to a highly skilled surgeon. It increases retail in the corridor. It increases the quality of the building stock. It's adding retail. Other than the play component of the comprehensive plan, the live, work, and move components are satisfied. And the plan is in conformance with generally accepted development standards and exceeds some generally accepted development standards in Inglewood. The materials that are being used for the development are high quality. One place where there was an issue is in the signage, but although there are more signs, the signs are being reduced to half the size of what's allowed. And the application, for those reasons, is substantially consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the city and the
I vote yes. It's consistent with the comprehensive plan, the mixed-use content. It fits really well in the medical district. It exceeds our design standards and consistent with our city's goals and objectives. Thank you. Wonderful project. Yes, that's a yes.
I vote yes for all of the reasons that my the gentleman to my left outlined. I will not repeat because he, like you said, made your life easier, and it's a very energetic and nice plan.
I vote yes for the reasons previously stated. I think it's a very well thought out project. It's great for their area and great for Inglewood, so thank you.
I vote yes, too, for the same reasons already stated, and I think it really fits well with our comprehensive plan. I don't believe the properties surrounding it are negatively impacted, or they would have been here. We know that. And I think it's a fabulous project. And I want to commend both staff and the developer for working so well together to come to us with such a fabulous project. It must have been a long process, so I appreciate your time.
I find that I agree with much of the other commissioners, with a few exceptions, in that we appear to have morphed our PUD process, which actually I think I like that. And so now PUDs are now being used to coordinate development, and I think that's a great thing, actually. So I do think it's a morph, and I think we're setting a precedent. So I find that. I will just mention briefly that I think this is like a poster child project development that is the kind of thing that we want to see in Inglewood, and that it is elegant is the only word I can think of. I also find that that I believe that it will impact negatively congestion, density, and especially the landscaping. So I'm not thrilled with that. But again, that's maybe the direction we're taking. So therefore, I vote yes.
Thank you. Mark, thank you very much for reading my statements. I appreciate that. Saved me a great deal of time and trouble. But no, I do believe it's a wonderful development for what has been already stated, and in an effort to be very brief, I vote yes.
I vote yes. I feel as though that we've met all of the requirements for the PUD, and that the project definitely aligns with multiple goals in the comp plan, and many of the ones that staff put in the staff report. And in addition to that, there's 3 goals within the medical district area or 3 policies, I guess, within the medical district area portion of the comp plan that this project specifically addresses as well. I feel as though it will have a positive impact on the surrounding community, and I'm happy to see more thought put into the pedestrian part of Old Hampton Avenue rather than just continuous parking garages that on Old Hampton, that there'll be more amenities for pedestrians. Exceeds our quality standards and design standards. And I think the uses align with the underlying zoning very well. So that's what I got.
Madam Chairman, I move that we,
Yes, abandon the rest.
Thank you to the commission.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I'd move that we suspend the balance of the agenda and adjourn.
Second.
And do we need to set a date for our other portion of the public hearing? Or other? I guess it's not a public hearing piece, it's just our vote. So we can just continue that at the next meeting for the bylaws. Okay. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Expensive. Mr. Mulhern?